In this lesson, we're going to start talking about object-oriented programming. Now, this is a topic that is a study in and of itself. And if you've done any type of research on object-oriented programming, then you've had a ton of different terms and ideas and concepts just thrown at you. And if you are intimidated, well, yes, you should be, because there's a lot there. But as far as this course is concerned, don't be. We're not going to be talking about patterns and how to identify patterns and where you should use a particular type of pattern. And, there's a lot of other things. We're not going to worry about any of that. In this lesson, we are going to create an object. In fact, let's look at what we are going to do. Let's open up File, Functions. Let's go to the add term function, and we have these 6 lines of code where we create an object. Now, really what we've done is created an associative array. Then we've converted it into an object and stored that as an object in this obj variable. And then we add that object to the items array. So that instead of all of that, what we will do is create an object by using a class, so that we are still going to add an object to our items array, but it's going to look like this. We're going to create a class called glossary terms, and it is going to accept 2 parameters. We'll have the term itself, followed by the definition, and that's it. Our code is still going to work just fine. So I've used this term class. A class is really nothing more than a blueprint for creating an object. So I tend to think of object-oriented programming as in, well, everyday life. We live in an object-oriented world. I have a pen on my desk and I can pick it up, I can take the cap off and I can write, I can put the cap back on, set it back down. If I need to write again, I just pick it back up and take the cap off, write, put the cap back on, set it back down. The whole concept of object-oriented programming is so that we can reuse objects. And in order to reuse objects, we need to be able to create them. And just like this pen, the manufacturer has a blueprint for creating these pens. We're going to have a blueprint for creating a glossary term. And we will do that inside of a new file. So inside of our data folder, let's create a new file. We'll call it glossaryterm.class.php. So the class in the file name just denotes that there is a class inside of this file. And we typically have just one class inside of a file. And to create a class, we start with the class keyword, followed by the name of the class. Now, by convention, classes begin with an uppercase letter. You don't have to follow that convention, but you really should. So just use an uppercase letter for the class name, and then the opening and closing curly braces. And there we have just created a class called glossary term. Now, by itself, this isn't very useful. What we want to do is construct an object. That's just a fancy way of saying that we're going to create an object. And we create an object using what's called a constructor function. We define a constructor function just like a normal function, but it is inside of our glossary term class, and it is called __ construct. And other than that, it's just like any other type of function. So we can have our term parameter. We also need our definition parameter, because remember, whenever we created this glossary term, we passed in the term and definition. So we want our constructor to have those parameters as well. And then we just need to set up what are essentially called properties. A property is nothing more than something that describes the object. So going back to this idea of a pen, this is made out of plastic. So a pen might have a material property that would be set to plastic. The ink color in this is black. So that would be a property. We could call it ink. And then the body color is a dark gray. So in this particular case, we have a glossary term. A glossary term really has 2 things, the term itself and the definition. So to create a property, we need to first of all refer to this object that we are working with. And to do that, we have a very special variable called $this. We use that inside of a class to refer to the object that we are working with. So going back to where we have called this glossary term constructor, whenever we create this object, this variable is going to refer to that object. That's how it can refer to itself from inside of itself. Sounds kind of weird, but all we are doing here is we're saying that this object's property called term is equal to the value that was passed as the term parameter. Then we will essentially do the same thing for the definition. Now, I do want you to be aware of the dollar signs here. We used the dollar sign for this variable. That's very important, because otherwise PHP isn't going to understand what this is. However, the property name does not have a dollar sign. But then, of course, since we are using the parameter that was defined in the constructor function, those begin with a dollar sign. So just remember, this begins with a dollar sign, the property name doesn't. And then, of course, if we are referring to a variable or a parameter, then we use the dollar sign there. So what we have done here is we've created a term property and a definition property for every glossary term object that we create. And that's going to match up with what we have done in the other parts of our code. Like, for example, in the search terms function, where we use the term property and the definition property, all of those are going to match up. So that now that we have this glossary term class, all we really need to do then is require that new file, glossaryterm.class.php. That's going to pull in that file so that we can then use that glossary term class to create those objects. And so we can test this very easily. Let's create a new term, and let's create one for the extensible markup language, XML. That was the wrong thing. So the definition is extensible markup language. So whenever we create this term, we will see it listed in our list, which means that our code works just fine. But now it's a little bit easier to understand what we're doing here. Not only did we reduce the lines of code, at least as far as our add term function is concerned, but we also made it very clear what we are doing. We are creating a new glossary term, whereas that was kind of lost in our old code. So we can be more concise, we can be more clear as well. Now, you can make the argument that we really didn't need to do that in this particular case, and yes, that's true. This is a very simple class, but the reason is I needed an example to use, and that was perfect there. But in the next lesson, we're going to create another class, one that we would use to interact with our data store.